Unfortunately, some people can't be with us for the whole session. Also, by all means, do come a bit forward. This is a big room, and it's really hard to reach out to the back. Okay. Let's wait until we have fixed that. Yeah, I'll. Okay, hello, good morning. Yes, first session, IGF 2016, welcome all. My name is Marco Hoogwoning. I work for the RIPE NCC, which is the regional internet registry for Europe, Middle East, and parts of Central Asia. And I'll be moderating this session together with my colleague Chris Buckridge, who also works for the RIPE NCC. We have a floating mic around. We're gonna try to make this session as interactive as possible. We do have a couple of key speakers, which I'll be introducing in a bit. What are we here to talk about? Well, we gave it the wonderful title of The Network of Network Things, Finding the Internet in IoT. What we like to address here in the coming hour and a half is whether the current internet governance structures and the current institutions and the current framework of internet governance, multi-stakeholder, open model, is fit for purpose to accommodate whatever comes under the IoT flag. As I said, we've got a broad range and broad spectrum of speakers here that will sort of lead us a bit in the discussion, can ask questions. By all means, if you're here, do chime in. We've also got a remote moderator, which means that if you do ask a question, please use one of the microphones and state your name and affiliation. Also, if you are listening and watching remotely, by all means, do chime in via the WebEx and we can relay your questions. So, in a somewhat non-random fashion, introducing some of our key contributors to this session. Up here on my right is Corinne Cutt, who is working with the Oxford Internet Institute. Next to her, Dominik Lazansky from the GSMA, the GSM Association. Next to her, Anja Ogorgovic, who is here on behalf of Virtual Warsaw Project. To my left here, Jari Arco, who works for Ericsson and is here in this capacity as chair of the Internet Engineering Task Force. Next to him, Paul Wilson, head of APNIC, our colleague RER from the Asian Pacific region. And remote, we had Uta Meyer-Hahn coming in from Germany, we'll hopefully can patch her in later a bit. And down here to the end is my co-moderator, Chris Buckridge. With that, I think we don't have real big opening statements. I do probably want to give Anja a bit of a chance to explain what Virtual Warsaw is doing and why we're all here in terms of the challenges they're facing, and hopefully we can address some of these questions during the session. So, Anja, please.
Okay. Hello. Hello, my name is Anja Gorkovic. I'm the managing director of the CAREX Group. Thank you very much for RIPE for inviting me here. Thank you very much for the other organizers for supporting this session. We spoke about, kind of in the beginning, the idea that there are established technical and standardization spaces, and those working in the evolving IoT space. And I suppose that I will be one of those people, and we are one of those people working in this evolving IoT space. For the last year, we have been contracted to help the city of Warsaw gather in a first phase, do a bit of an information gathering phase on how to implement IoT in the urban landscape. So this is an implementation of a large IoT system by local authorities. We have the good luck to be supported both politically and with a very strong administration body that is interested in implementing this brand new, brave new world of IoT. I've been in charge for the past year of working within a think tank, bringing together really the top minds of the world today, from Singapore to Los Angeles, to speak about how to implement IoT in this urban landscape from three large perspectives. One's in terms of the public procurement of innovation, second in terms of the technology itself, and thirdly, because we are talking about local government, in terms of the open innovation aspect and how to build an ecosystem around IoT and how to build the stakeholder engagement model. I've been asked to talk a little bit about the challenges that we had of the challenges of reaching out to the stakeholders and bringing them together to speak about what is possible, and both in terms of the technology and the standardization. And I'm sure we're going to come back to it in later discussions, but we found that to find basically a workable blueprint for local governments to implement IoT in this year, 2016, has proved extremely difficult. We are one of the only authorities which are implementing this as far as possible. We already have an RFP out for implementation in what we call a large 800-acre zone. Large 800-acre geography. It's an RFP for the design, the execution, the implementation, testing, commissioning, service, and guaranteeing an urban IoT system within the city of Warsaw. We have found that we have run up quite a lot of challenges in terms of both the types of standardization suggestions which are put out, both by very different stakeholders, and in terms of the technology that can be used, and especially in terms of the technology which is feasible to be implemented on the ground level at this day and age. I'm sure we're going to come back to it in later discussions.
Thank you. Meanwhile, another panelist core contributor has shown up, Lukinov, who is affiliated with the IEEE, so another internet standards organization. Thank you for your introduction, Anja. We do have two speakers that have a collision in their agenda, so I want to briefly go to them first. Yari needs to leave at 10 o'clock, and I believe Grace from the NTIA is also here for a bit. So maybe, Grace, you want to kick off a bit and then sort of add to what Anja said in terms of starting the... No?
Sure, thank you, Marco. My name is Grace Abu Hamid. I'm with NTIA, which is part of the Department of Commerce in the United States. The Department of Commerce has recognized IoT as a huge cultural phenomenon and a big technology trend, and so we're working with our stakeholders. We put out an RFC, request for comments, in March this year, and we're working to develop sort of a department paper, which is expected by the end of this year, that takes into account the community's feedback. We received about 130 comments when we published the RFC in March, and we've since then hosted a workshop in September, public workshop to bring together stakeholders in the United States. And we've started a multi-stakeholder process on focusing on consumer IoT devices and the patchability and upgradability of those devices. And that's a process that we expect will bring together not just American stakeholders, but people from around the world. If you're interested in joining, please contact me after the session. But we're looking to have that lead a little bit and sort of foster the growth of IoT in the United States, and then also make sure that we're getting our stakeholders to focus on the consumer devices and security of the devices as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, Chris?
Sorry, Chris Buckridge here, and I thought I'd just take my first stab at being the co-moderator here. One thing, Grace, maybe I wanted to just follow up with you quickly while we're sort of have these first two speakers coming a bit more from maybe the public sector side and the end user side. Are you able to share any of what the sort of themes you saw coming through in the RFC or in the workshop, and did they relate to the sort of challenges that Anya was talking about in what she spoke about?
Sure, thanks, Chris. So we did, one of the big themes in the request for comments was security of consumer devices, which is why we launched the multi-stakeholder process on that specific topic. The other big themes, standards is an issue. We believe in the private sector leading on that. We also, availability of spectrum was raised as well as a big issue. And in general, sort of education and making sure that there's that we foster the environment for successful IoT development. That was a big theme as well.
Thank you. So two speakers already, both Anya and Grace, sort of foster the current internet environment, an open model, including all the stakeholders. Maybe Paul. maybe as both Grace and Anya already touched upon, like the fostering the current environment and then sort of making the Internet of Things sort of grow into the current internet model. Maybe you can explain a bit on what that would mean in sort of that multi-stakeholder environment and how that can be, or how that would be adopted to the IoT if needed.
Sure, Marco, thanks very much. Something about the IoT, the so-called IoT, that makes me uncomfortable is this idea that somehow the IoT is something different from the internet. Now, the Internet of Things is a nice new name for the internet because the internet is becoming the Internet of Things, but in a lot of discussions about the so-called IoT, it's treated as something different, as though the IoT is identifiable, as though it can be subjected to new and different policies, as though it needs new and different policies. The internet has been around for a long time now, and we've been connecting things to the internet for a very long time. And the things that we've been connecting have been becoming more numerous and, importantly, steadily more and more diverse in terms of the distinct models of devices which are coming along and the new manufacturers which are coming along. So there's certainly a very important, very rapid acceleration in what's happening on the internet in terms of connected things. But I think it's really important to see a continuum of challenges. We've had new security issues which have come about over the years in new operating system releases, in new computer releases, in new phones and apps and so forth. So again, the challenges that we've had have been, they're things that we know about. The IETF, for instance, has, and this is something Jari could speak about, of course, but the IETF has been defining what they call host requirements for many years. That is where, in traditional internet terms, any device connected to the internet was known as a host. So host requirements can be applied to devices or things connected to the internet as well. And I'm sure that within the IETF there's work being done continually to actually refine in reaction to what's going on the internet, to refine the host requirements. They could become thing or device requirements in future. But it really is a process of ongoing requirement and learning from the past that we're looking at here. So just as an opening remark, again, my position is there is no such thing as the Internet of Things. It is not identifiable, it is not distinct, it's not something that can have or should have a sort of separate consideration, unless, of course, as I say, the internet itself is now the Internet of Things. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. Well, Jari, that's a nice point for you probably to pick up and explain what actually is changing on the internet then.
Right. Thank you. And I just wanted to quickly follow up on this host requirements question. And it's starting to look like we actually need to write a document somewhere that says obvious things like, you should not deploy millions of devices with default passwords. But it's starting to be maybe useful, not for the sake of like anybody in this room getting a surprise from that, but it might even be, if you write that the best current practice for doing IoT devices is this, that you at least have to fill these kinds of requirements, then that may provide some leverage on who's doing things correctly, and if you misbehave, then perhaps that can be considered as well. But I also wanted to follow up just a little bit on this general concept of IoT versus the rest of the internet. I fully agree with my colleague here that the IoT is just really a further evolution of the internet, and a part of that, and needs to be administered as part of that. And of course, there's many further challenges there. But just to provide one further reason why we need to consider IoT as part of the internet and more of the same kind of thing is that the IoT, don't think of the IoT as gadgets. Those are the easily seen things, and it's kind of tangible. It's not the whole thing. It's usually a system. You have the cloud that handles the data. You have a user interface on your device. You have some web interface. You have interface to some other systems, billing or whatever. And you have the gadget. So it's the whole system, and all that needs to work across the internet, and usually does on diverse locations. So that's really my definition of the Internet of Things, and that's important that we cover that. Thank you.
Thank you, Jari. Oleg, you also raised your hand. So.
Yes, it's an interesting discussion. Whenever we talk about definitions, one of the beautiful things about definitions is there are so many of them to choose from. And even if you look at IoT definitions, people try to do so, and I think there are about 200 of them floating around, looking from various points. Whether or not IoT is an evolutionary step for internet, or we should consider internet as a horizontal technology, that's a big question, indeed. Because when we talk about IoT, I think one of the distinct elements that we need to consider is that IoT is really becoming something that forces us to think of semantic interoperability among various applications, not just devices. And it raises, in my opinion, the bar a little bit higher than what we thought about before. You're absolutely right. Host requirements are very important. But if you think about applications residing on a host and how those applications will interact with other applications potentially residing on other devices, that's really cutting into the heart of IoT. And to me, that's actually the most important elements that we need to figure out how to solve today. It's how to create cross-domain semantic interoperability. And actually, I'm proud to say that there is a lot of work going on in this dimension. You will see next week, and I'm kind of tipping off my hand, there is going to be a press release talking about a joint white paper that was developed by the members of IEEE, W3C, 1M2M, AOITI, and a couple of other organizations. And that was a huge step because, traditionally, if you look at groups working in different silos, there is not a lot of interactions. And looking from the point of view of myself, I'm a practitioner coming from the industry. That is a great challenge because when we start implementing something, not having a roadmap, a blueprint for semantic interoperability, it makes choices very difficult. And as we all know, anybody in the industry, if there is a choice to be made, multiple decisions to be taken, well, it's better to wait out and see which one will become a predominant direction to follow. Any type of, I would say, uncertainty throttles down the development and progress of Internet of Things, or Internet as a whole. So I think whether or not we agree that it's an evolutionary step, it's one and the same, frankly speaking, I don't really care. What I do care about is we need to figure out how to create a multi-stakeholder environment, not only at the level of stakeholders representing organizations, institutions, and academia, but also multitude of standards development organizations really becoming one and starting to work together. And as I said before, I'm very pleased to say that this work is underfoot, and my other hat is wearing a hat of a chair of IEEE P2413, which is a standard for an architectural framework of IoT. And we had put a lot of effort in bringing multitude of organizations together. And I encourage everybody to do the same, because that is a key enabler and key factor to the growth.
Thanks, Oleg. I think you touched on some really important points there, particularly in terms of the sort of the need and the importance of that coordination amongst the different standards organizations that exist already on the internet, and how that can be useful and necessary for, well, people like Anya and end users who are trying to develop within this area.
I would even say step beyond that, collaboration, not just coordination. We need to proactively collaborate, not just coordinate.
Sorry, I'll follow up with a quick question. Is that collaboration that hasn't happened in the past? Is that something we need more of today?
Traditionally, if you look, one of the jokes that goes around the industry is that there are plenty of standards to choose from. Whenever you decide to implement something, you always have a choice of standards to be made. In some cases, it's a good thing. Diversity helps, and biodiversity in the industry is helpful. But in some cases, it becomes a throttling factor. So collaboration of multitude of standards development organizations is a good thing. I'll give you a very positive example. As an example, we all know about the upcoming tidal wave of electric vehicles, right? It has been in talks for many, many years, and now we're finally starting to see electric vehicles everywhere. But what it really took for that to happen is a solution for the charging of those electric vehicles. And that's a great example when the industry came together on a worldwide level and created a standard called ISO/IEC 15118, which was adopted by DIN in Germany, SAE in US, by IEEE as well, and now it became a platform for cross-domain, cross-industry collaboration, because if you're thinking about electric vehicle charging, it's automotive industry, it's power industry, it's consumer, it's a multi-stakeholder environment. It's a great example when really the boundaries among various standards development organizations were crushed, or maybe merged, fused, whatever you choose to consider as a proper word here, and as a result, we have an industry that is becoming to be a blooming one.
So I think the other great thing about this workshop is that we actually do have representatives from so many of the different standardization organizations. So I wanted to throw next actually to Dominik Lazansky, who's with GSMA, who I'm sure will also have their own perspective on this ecosystem and the standardization going on.
Thanks. I'm just going to follow up on some of the points you just made, if it's not too buzzy. I think when you think of IoT in terms of the standards making and the collaboration that you just touched upon, you think about sorry, is there on? Maybe that's better. Yeah, okay. You think about sort of the qualities that you want for the Internet of Things, right? And for things, as you mentioned, to be interoperable and sort of connected. And those are sort of aspects are openness, interoperability, and security, right? So then you start to think about those qualities from a standards point of view, and those are the things that you want to bring to collaboration, to be able to discuss different particular players on the different sort of layers of IoT as well, to be able to sort of see a framework, to communicate, to be multi-stakeholder. I think these are all qualities that are really, really important as we go forward. Obviously, as Oleg said, there's many different types of standards that tend to be quite siloed in their making process. And so there is also, on the other side, the flip side, the tendency for some governments in particular that some of our members are working with, who want to define predefine very technical standards from in their country frameworks that would set sort of mandates for sort of technical aspects, which is something that we're advocating against, obviously, at the GSMA, because you just don't know in 5 years or 10 years how the market's going to sort of play out, and that's a good thing. And also there are some, quite large international organizations that are doing much the same and creating standards, not from a multi-stakeholder process, but from a very much from a bilateral or multilateral process. Which we can talk about a little more in detail later. Just to highlight two things the GSMA are doing with our members, and we have obviously mobile operators as well as sort of ecosystem players, everyone from handset manufacturers to content providers. We have a program called Connected Living, which is now just massive. I can't even keep up with everything that's going on. But we've put out 2 frameworks, which are obviously non-binding standards, but adopted by a number of our members and worked on by our members. One is on the embedded SIM for IoT, and the other one is on our security framework for IoT that's just come out in Mobile World Congress about a year ago. So those are living documents as well, and they continue to grow and change as we get feedback from all the different players in this area. So I'll leave it there and hopefully catch up later.
I think it will be certainly interesting to come back later to that sort of alternative model of standards making and whether that's been embraced and who's embracing that. But I think it would be nice to throw next to Corinne Kath, if you're ready, who's a researcher who's particularly done some work on human rights in standards development, which I think is sort of obviously a very relevant topic, particularly when we're talking about standards for IoT and connected devices in sort of more and more imbricated in our lives. So, Corinne.
Sure, thank you. As much as I would like to be able to say that we're at a point where we can start talking about human rights in standards in IoT, I think one of the first things we need to address is security and privacy for all obvious reasons. It's always good to be the last one to speak because then I can just say whatever they said and pretty much wrap up. That being said, there are some things that have been mentioned briefly here that I would like to focus on again as being very important. What do we mean when we're talking about IoT? I think there's a lot of need for further categorization, especially when we're talking about how to include this in a multi-stakeholder model. So can we make sure that we make a difference when we're talking about IoT as in device to device, device to cloud, et cetera, because we need that to be able to actually look at what are the privacy and security considerations that we need to look at. Another thing that I think is important to mention is that some of the things that we've referred to as being IoT are also industry control systems that have their own set of standards that need to be met. As much as there's been a focus on IoT not necessarily being a new thing, I do think it has a lot of qualities that in combination with the fact that it's going to scale so quickly make a very strong case for the fact that we need to be really more on top of the security and the privacy things. I mean, the scale of it, the fact that power and memory is limited, the direct interaction with the environment, so humans to a certain extent are out of the loop. There's all these very unique challenges. And I think, for instance, if you look at the Mirai examples, you see that there's a lag in security and the possibility to update. So pretty much we have all this stuff on the network that's going to be there for 30, 40 years, and it's just not safe. And then sort of the last question of, does the multi-stakeholder model cover everything, or do we also need, for instance, more regulation? I think we need to also keep in mind that because this is not necessarily a new thing, the governments are already doing a lot of things in terms of standardization, in terms of regulation. So I would definitely focus on not trying to reinvent the wheel, but just improve what we have.
Thank you, Corinne. Now, yes, you are the last speaker here. We do have somebody hanging remote. I hope Uta is still online. And one of the things that was raised by several people here is coordination between standardization bodies, coordination between user groups, stakeholders there. The fundamental part of the internet is coordination, but also I think part of that is, and that's sort of where Oleg touched upon this, it's very informal, and hopefully Uta has been researching a bit on sort of these relationships and these coordination relationships between internet operators. So maybe Uta, if you are online, can you speak to that?
Marco, and sorry, Uta, just I wanted to jump in quickly on a bit more of an administrative matter and just say, yes, Uta's the last sort of speaker we had planned here. You'll notice we're only half an hour into this, and that's intentional. But I would like to encourage people to be thinking, if you have any comments, we really want to throw the floor open and get the discussion going after this. So yeah, please think about that. So sorry, Uta, please go on.
Can you hear me now? Am I being heard? I think I need to be made the speaker. Oh, I can see myself now. Great. Thank you so much for having me. So I'd like, as Marco just introduced, I'd like to offer a point of view on this disconnect that we have between the network and the realms of application and service, and if you will, the realm where the IoT resides. And so I'd like to start with something that that everybody probably is aware of, and that is the internet architecture, which separates character and content. But that has implications because this means that network operators provision connectivity, reachability, and the transmission of data independently from the applications or services that cause these data flows. And on the other hand, we all know that the providers of content services and applications at the edges of the network are free to innovate, and as long as they comply with the features of the Internet Protocol. And the Internet of Things, or connecting more and more devices, is a result of that. Now, I'd like to say that this design feature of the Internet has implications for Internet governance, and specifically for the informal character of Internet governance at the core of the network, because it creates good conditions for self-regulation and coordination at the core of the network, but less so on the edges. So at the core of the network, some people may not be aware of it, but the network operators' work goes into producing those horizontal ties between the networks. That's obviously what we call internet interconnection, and this is how connectivity is being manufactured and also repaired. And I say manufactured instead of just established, because interconnecting networks is just as much of a social process as it is an engineering task. So when network operators interconnect their networks, they enter into relationships that are characterized by interdependence and uncertainty. Interdependence because they are competitors, but if they don't work together, then none of them have a product. And uncertainty is caused by some of the internet protocols that are used for internet interconnection. So in a sense, the network is a shared fate system. And one result of that is that network engineers around the globe collaborate. This is fostered by the RIRs, and some of it is formalized too, for instance, in the form of current best practices for routing, for instance. But very often these ties are personal, and so are the do's and don'ts of networking. They follow informal conventions. And you can imagine it like a social network that is underlying the internet as a network of networks. And what this mounts up to is a coordinative capacity at the core of the network. Let's call it the governance capacity. Now, looking at the content application layers, the internet architecture does not induce a similar need for collaboration. The developers of applications have more freedom to innovate, and they don't need to check back with network providers or other competitors. And so what's new here? I've heard this question being asked before, and I'd like to say this configuration, of course, has always been a challenge. So that's not new. What I think may be different or changing on this continuum, I agree, is that this data authority is moving to the edge, less so on the servers anymore in the network, but to things in the material world. And that is an issue when we take into consideration that these devices are often autonomous and that they are constrained. So at a recent ITF meeting, Carsten Bormann pointed out that these devices are not pet devices, many of them. They are often distributed in the environment. So what I'd like to pose as something that we probably should work on is that we should look at how to foster operational control that guarantees maintenance and repair of these devices, and also that we need to discuss about where to implement responsibility for when IoT devices go out of control. And so in the beginning, I've pointed out how the internet architecture conditions this collaboration and trust among network operators, and that similar conditions do not exist for app developers, or at least not naturally. So I think we should look at how we can build crutches to foster similar collaboration. This term has also been used before here, and how to engage in more capacity, but also community building among the diverse set of new actors that enter the scene. I think that is fundamental. They come from various industries. We have to include them because they are not networking experts. They may not be web experts. They probably don't come to IETF meetings. They don't come to the IGF or IRR meetings. So I think to bring these new set of actors aboard is that we should collaborate more. What is happening right now in Mexico at the IGF too, with the standardization bodies, with the vendors and developers, and collaborate with those where IoT vendors and developers have to go anyways. So we need to get the certification bodies aboard and the standardization bodies and collect the IoT people from there. And in terms of responsibility, I think that also suggestion from the ITF meeting that we should think about helping make the business case for services for maintenance and repair of IoT. And that's my suggestions. I'm happy to discuss. Thanks.
Thank you, Uta. Collaboration at other layers of the internet. And I already saw you raise your finger, Jari. So you want to chime in on parts of what Uta said, and indeed the collaboration factor in sort of the higher level that also Oleg talked about.
Yeah, thank you. And very much agree with what you, Uta, said. And I guess the sort of the fundamental issue here is that the internet allows the creation of new technology, new applications, new spaces, like basically without any limits. So it's sort of infinite creation space, and anybody can do that. And they get to decide, how open their new things are and how they're administered or not. And that's actually a feature that the internet allows us. But of course, when something gets very big and widely deployed and has a big impact on the society, we start thinking about how well this is done, and if there are areas where we could do better. I think around the table we have already found some consensus that we need more interoperability at all levels, not just being able to put them in the same mobile network or same internet, but also at the semantic interoperability level. We at the Internet Architecture Board did a workshop earlier this year on this exact topic, and that was start of some of these collaborations going on in the world today. But it's really a sort of a tussle, and we're going back and forth in this battle of how far we have standardized things or not. And the basic example of that is that you buy a house with Microsoft light switches, and you can't use the Apple light bulbs in the house, and that's bad. That's bad for the society. It might be good for some particular vendor in a very limited sense, but we all win more if this thing is more widely interoperable and more widely usable. So we, for instance, who provide the networks, can sell more networks, and more data gets transferred when this works better. So it is to our benefit to try and push this further in the standardization space. And I'm very much a believer in this informal collaboration, and I just wanted to bring up the point that at the fundamental level, we can't around this table decide what particular application developers do. So we have to give them incentives to do that.
Sorry, Paul, I saw you raise your finger as well.
Look, I'm happy to contribute, but also happy to leave you two open to the floor.
No, please, by all means. I mean, we've got a good set going, so feel free to chime in.
Well, look, I'm going to wave the internet flag again. We've been hearing about semantic interoperability and privacy and data protection and so forth, and these are all issues of application and usage of the internet, and very, very important layers at which to establish standards, but again, not to see them as special needs or new needs of the so-called Internet of Things, because the same challenge has existed for many years, and organisations like the W3C, and this is talking about collaboration and understanding who else is in the space, but organisations like W3C have made huge investments in interoperability at the web layer, at the applications layer, payment systems, accessibility, media standards, encryption, authentication. All of this stuff is being really thoroughly covered. And the risk of not seeing this is that manufacturers want to come along and become IoT companies without understanding that they may want to become internet companies first, or at least at the same time. They don't have to see themselves that way. They can do whatever they like, as Jari said. But there's a huge benefit in looking at what's gone on before over many, many years of internet evolution, because there's an ecosystem which a new manufacturer is getting into. And I think there does need to be, or there's a huge benefit in seeing a merger between that internet ecosystem with existing manufacturing ecosystems, which are also very well established, to harmonise those and for them to be able to take advantage in both directions of what's become before. And very critically today, within the internet ecosystem, there's a security ecosystem as well that's getting to be pretty complex and pretty advanced in terms of the number of players and the amount of collaboration that's required to keep advancing internet security. So I haven't even mentioned multi-stakeholder aspects of the IoT here, because if we will see the IoT as an inseparable subset of the internet, then the ecosystem already is a multi-stakeholder ecosystem. We already accept that, and we don't have to have a new argument about whether the IoT should be multi-stakeholder or not. It's already a given. Thanks.
Okay, I've got Oleg, and then I'm going to take it back to the floor. So get your questions ready.
Okay.
I would like to just build on what Paul said, and I fully agree with you. By definition, we're in an environment that has to be multi-stakeholder. And I think one dimension that IoT really brings to the forefront, it's a fusion between operational technologies and ICT technologies. Because if you think about IoT, it's really an opportunity that hasn't existed before to connect physical world to the world that we create in a digital domain. And all of the sensors and all of the actuators that we can sprinkle around our physical world creates this great opportunity. What does it really mean to us? And what does it mean? What kind of additional aspects and dimensions of privacy and security does it bring? By the way, I encourage everybody in this kind of promotion to join session at 12 o'clock today, when we will talk about an IEEE opportunity to contribute into the space through our ETAPs, Experts in Technology and Policy events around the globe, and our Internet Initiative. And we call it Internet Initiative because we focus on issues of privacy and security and bringing technology developers and policymakers together. But back to the original point, if you think about additional elements as an example that are exposed today. I recently was at the panel, and one of the researchers was talking about that the gestures that we use to extract our smartphone out of the pocket could be used as an identifier of our personality with the same degree of accuracy as our fingerprint. That's fascinating. And if you think about the world where actually devices that surround us and connect to internet and transmit this information about us can really create our persona based on that type of secondary factors, well, it's a completely new dimension of privacy and security that we need to consider. It didn't exist before. It goes way beyond of our browsing history. It goes way beyond our location history. It is something really new and something that, in my opinion, creates this next step in the evolution of whatever we decided to call it, internet or internet of things, or we decide to create a new name. But this is where our kids will be living in. That's a world that will be based on that type of informational flows.
Thanks, Oleg, and thanks, everyone. I think it's good to sort of throw to the rest of the room now, since we have plenty of people in. Hanan, you had a point to start with.
Hi, good morning. I'm a little bit far of the microphone. My name is Hanan, and I'm managing an IG program for HIVOS, and I'm currently doing research on the security considerations vis-a-vis the Internet of Things. And maybe I'll take you back to basics here, because it would be really nice if one of the speakers defined the stakeholders that you're referring to, so everybody in the room who is not familiar with the topic understands what we're talking about. The second question is relating to a point that was made that some governments are trying to predefine rules or regulation. To my understanding, it's not going to work, because if a device from the US, for example, let's say the US is a little bit ahead and they are trying to set up these regulations. If a device in the US is connected to another one in China, for example, and we have manufacturers who are not respecting the security, regulations that you predefined previously, it's not going to work. So I don't think that regulation is tied to jurisdiction and to geographic, basically borders. So how is that going to work practically? Are you going to go into agreements with manufacturers in China, for example? How are you going to make sure whatever you stipulate is going to be enforced? Because one of the conclusions I made in my research is that it's not possible to force manufacturers from other countries to abide by local regulation.
So that, I don't see any other questions straight away, so I'm perhaps going to throw. Oh, we do? Okay,
I've got two questions, but
okay,
maybe it's a good opportunity for Anja to respond, and I'll get the mic to the next question.
Okay, all right.
Oh, no, go ahead. Hi, thanks for this question. Yeah, sorry. Okay. I think Dominique will speak more about exactly how national regulation can influence the choice of vendors in IoT. In terms of your first question about the stakeholders that you wanted to ask us to kind of better target. This is a great question, especially in terms of the urban IoT system that we are working on, because it's a system which is led out of a department within the city. So this is the ground level, right? And it's led out of what's called the social projects department and the Department of Social Care, as it were, the welfare department. So this is basically an IoT system which is extremely focused on the most disadvantaged, as it were, amongst us, especially those which are the visually impaired and other handicapped, as it were, people. So what's interesting about this is that we found it much more easier and much more clear to find standards for accessibility that were very easy to grasp. These were great frameworks which were written in a way that public authorities could easily implement this in the RFPs. For instance, I have some that I wrote down, the famous ISO 9241, the ergonomics of human system design, web usability such as the Web Contact Accessibility Guidelines 2.0, the 12 kind of large guidelines and the different levels, AAA, single A, yeah, double A. Even BBC mobile accessibility guidelines, all of these were put into our RFP, but we had incredible difficulty of finding the equivalent in the kind of technical standard body. So we knew exactly we knew our stakeholders very well. So our stakeholders are a population which we're basically targeting with our with our system, which is going to cover one of the largest geographical areas so far. Our challenges were quite on the side of the technical and the standardization in terms of the system itself, actually. So that's that. And then kind of a little bit before passing the mic to Dominique about the national government regulation and the manufacturer things, I'm sure we have seen this year a rise of national regulations kind of forcing manufacturers to nuance their offerings in individual countries. Of course, I work in the EU in Poland, so this is obviously a different ballgame than many other countries out there. But even in Poland, we have a national interoperability framework which sets guidelines for the very minimal requirements for public bodies, for local government public bodies, right? And for the exchange of information in electronic form and for ICT systems. So there always will be a national kind of element, minimum kind of requirements. But I'm passing the mic to somebody who can explain how this looks like on the international scene.
Thank you. That's interesting, actually. I didn't know that. So you're absolutely right? So there's a couple of different aspects to this. One is the sort of consumer market choice. So vendors either participate or choose to participate in ETSI or IETF or various other standards organizations where they can collaborate and ensure that they participate in the creation and hopefully adoption of standards. On the other side of it, there are vendors and other different ecosystem players who choose to develop proprietary systems or closed systems as well. So you've got those two things, which I think in a more general sense will kind of, it's early days and will kind of flush itself out, and there'll be different aspects to how that works. But on the flip side, you've got different regulatory and policy frameworks. So we just heard from Poland, our colleague from the US talked about what their approach is to creating an IoT framework, which is very much bottom-up, multi-stakeholder driven, seeking contributions, doing workshops. And then we have seen some countries already start adopting very prescriptive frameworks for a variety of reasons, whether it has to do with increasing tax income or choosing to adopt specific, very technology orientated standards from places like the ITU or whatever it happens to be, where they create sort of heavy-handed frameworks and are starting to create heavy-handed frameworks for IoT. And this is obviously concern because there's usually tends to be a relationship between those countries that do that and the fact that those countries are underdeveloped or developing countries, emerging economies. In which case, sort of, that's one of the contradiction is that those countries tend to be the ones that probably could have huge explosive growth with IoT because they're so mobile focused to begin with. So what you're seeing is absolutely true, and I think you're going to have a variety of different ways that that's going to flesh out in terms of competition, adoption by consumers. But I would stress that from our point of view, you know, sort of having very baseline minimal regulation allows the ecosystem and the growth of IoT to happen, and of course that means some companies and vendors will fail, but others will flourish, and it'll change over time.
Okay. Thanks, Dominique and Anya. I think we've got a few questions from the floor, so I'm going to let us do a few of those in a row before we come back to our speakers. I'll start with the gentleman at the back here.
Hello, I'm João Pedro. I'm from Portugal. I'm a newcomer. It's interesting to, from a youth perspective, we see how difficult it is to find solutions in a multi-stakeholder way. I'd like to bring to the discussion that internet IoT is going to be a difficult thing to address when there's so many improvements to be done. I'd like to mention and address the issue of IPv4 versus IPv6. We spoke about access, and I know from being a youth ambassador, there are some issues with access. There are some people who won't be able to access with so many devices. I know there's network address translation, but personally, is it just postponing an emergent problem? I'd like to see your views on that problem, because finding solution, as I said, is difficult, but if we can't really put forward something that is being already implemented, but in the background, it's difficult, right? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm sure we'll have people up here who can speak to that issue. I'd like to go to the next speaker down here.
Good morning. My name is Arturo Serrano. I'm from Mexico. And I'd like to comment that I really agree with one of the presenters that she mentions that interconnectivity or interconnecting networks is more a social endeavor than a technical endeavor. And I think that we're talking here about human rights, community building, development. And I am a technologist, and I work in aspects of standards development, and I work in development of instruments. I'm a technologist, but I think that we would be very careful in not losing or missing the opportunity to consider some kind of reflection and also to raise the right questions in order to turn the Internet of Things in something that is very useful for the population. That is to say that there are questions that have to be raised that put the technical solutions in the context. And in my view, in my humble view, that goes first. And I don't want to go, I don't want to be disrespectful, but I think that I've seen a trend of basically a brutal technology push and marketing push before thinking of what is the context. and that would contribute to the inequalities that we're seeing in the world. So we have to be careful that the standards is important, technology is important, but the context is even more important. So let's not lose the opportunity to turn the Internet of Things in something that really develops the world. And that's my view.
Thank you. The gentleman in the yellow shirt here.
Hi, I'm Barry Liba. I work with Yachty in the IETF. I also work in an organization called M3AAWG, the Messaging, Mobile, and Malware Anti-Abuse Working Group. And at their recent meeting in Paris, they started work on exactly one thing that Yachty mentioned, a best practices document recommending basic security for Internet of Things device manufacturers, not using default passwords, not using open ports that aren't necessary, and that sort of thing, in an attempt to make devices more secure and private and less open to abuse.
Great, thank you. Okay, and gentleman down the back there.
Hello. My name is João Carlos Coibé. I'm from Brazil. I'm representing a Movimento Mega, that was an organization that advocates for internet freedom. My concern is related to privacy and data protection, since Internet of Things can gather enormous amount of information about us and our habitat. And one speaker raised the important points that the Internet of Things must be regulated based on multi-stakeholder model. So I agree. The question is how to protect us for the case, for example, take just a hypothetical example, your smart fridge share to your health security company that you are, for example, are bringing too much butter, too much grass, and it efforts to increase your insurance for us. That's a silly example that shows up the problem I try to raise.
Thank you very much. I think we've got a few comments that some of our speakers wanted to make in response to those questions and comments. Paul, will you? No? Okay. Corinne?
Yeah, so I'd like to make a quick comment to the gentleman in the back who focused on IoT being used for the public good, for the good of society, and focusing on human rights. I think it's a very good point. It's something we tend to glance over when we're talking about these discussions because there's so many more immediate problems that we see. That being said, I think it's easier said than done, as Yari, who had to go, unfortunately, just mentioned. There's a huge issue in getting people who are actually working on this to have a long-term vision of what IoT can do. And you need that to be able to have the standardization that requires that. So I think there is a real need to continue this conversation, and that's also why I think that having this multi-stakeholder kind of approach to IoT is so important, because that allows for actors who don't necessarily sit at the table automatically to come together. So for instance, Human Rights NGO Article 19 is doing a lot of work surrounding human rights in the IETF, just bringing that particular perspective to a technical body. And I think similar actions need to be undertaken when it comes to IoT and the multi-stakeholder model. So to make sure that those representing public interest, those having a clear understanding of specific contexts within specific countries, are also there when we're discussing these issues. I think it's a good point, but a lot of work needs to be done.
I think there's been a couple of comments that have pointed to a bit of an issue of incentive here. And I think you talked about the sort of manufacturers not necessarily thinking about issues like human rights. We've talked about, these manufacturers who are not necessarily feeling like they're part of an internet operator, an internet provider. Are there any thoughts on how you incentivize that? Obviously there's a regulatory model which can be a bit more of a heavy-handed way of doing it, but looking at it from a more multi-stakeholder, open way, are there ways that we can incentivize those new actors coming into this IoT space who maybe don't have the time, money, business interest to fully become part of the internet community or feel like they're part of the internet community? Is that one of the big challenges that we have?
I think a big incentive should be fear. For some bedtime reading, you might like to have a look at a blog post by APNIC's chief scientist, Jeff Houston, which was entitled The Internet of Stupid Things. You can Google that, and this is the first match, but what he showed actually is that even established internet companies can release bad devices onto the internet. It's pretty easy to do, but the new internet companies, the new internet IoT manufacturers are going to do so as well, and there's going to be companies failing as a result. And if you think of Samsung and their bad batteries and washing machines and so forth, and the opportunities of failures, which may not be random failures, but triggered through internet exploits and causing not only fires, but also privacy violations and all of the sorts of fears, all of the sorts of knock-on effects that we've spoken about here, I think that the potential for serious cost and failure is huge. So fear must be a big incentive. And I think the biggest culprit, and this is not a new one, but the biggest culprit in this will be the pressure on time to market. So this is a curse not just for Samsung and Microsoft over the years, but for manufacturers that go back to car companies and almost anyone you could think about, I think, has rushed something to market too quickly and found it doesn't work. And in this new connected world, the impact of rushing and minimizing time to market is going to be some bigger and more serious problems. And I don't think it'll take too long for any serious manufacturer to get that if they haven't already. Thanks.
So, Brave New World inspired by fear. It's 2016 in a microcosm there. I had a question from a participant just here.
Yeah, my name is Bishaka and I work with a non-profit in India. I wanted to actually follow up on the privacy and data protection question and try and push the conversation around the Internet of Things towards the concept of consent. And when we are discussing standards, there tends to be more of a discussion about technical standards. And I'm wondering whether there's a way in which we can think about consent or proxies for consent before, rather than sort of privacy and data protection only, which is after. I mean, we need both. So I'm curious if people have any thoughts on that.
Oleg here next to me already sort of said like, oh, I want to respond to this. So.
I actually wanted to respond to Paul's point regarding motivation by fear. I don't believe fear is a good motivator because fear forces you to run, and when you run scared, you actually don't look around and don't make right decisions. You're just trying to escape. I think there is a tremendous economic incentive in implementing proper policies and technologies around security and privacy. Because if you think about products that come into market, very much the same way that Samsung experienced a backlash of bad battery, bad privacy and security components will have even greater backlash. So when we start thinking about, and manufacturers already do, a lot of them do, think about security and privacy as a differentiator, as a feature that is promoted and actually something that enlarges manufacturers' footprint in the market. That's a great motivation. So I would rather focus on how we can set up an environment in which differentiation, privacy and security front can be a tremendous incentive for somebody to promote their products.
Thank you. I want to stick a bit at the fear. It's always bad to market on fear, but let's abuse it a bit more. And several people, and we're now just talking about sort of security in the privacy sense and data protection sense. Yes, the big elephant in the room, in my opinion, is security. It's been mentioned various times. And then I want to take it back to sort of the question of incentive. Because, as you said, that in theory, the market should do its job and then sort of the safer, better products will eventually triumph over the lesser safe products. But that will take probably a lot of collateral damage in the form of these incidents keep on happening until people realize that something needs to be taken. And that kind of reminds me of sort of that old book by Ralph Nader, Unsafe at Any Speed. And you actually brought up the car companies before. it took quite a lot before they fitted seatbelts. What's needed to get IoT people to fit seatbelts to their devices? And what will it take for users to wear those seatbelts?
I think there is a better analogy. Let's think about not seatbelts, but ABS brakes and airbags. Because that's actually, I think, would be a very good parallel to what we're trying to analyze here. And I would encourage you today, if you go in the market and try to find a car, as an example, in most of the countries around the world, I doubt that you would find one without airbag and ABS brakes. Seatbelt, it's more of a regulatory issue and I think cultural issues that needs to be overcome. And by the way, that goes back to consumer choice, right? Some consumers may decide to not spend a lot of money and stay with the product that is cheap and doesn't implement any privacy. But I don't think this is not really a decision based on technology. It's a decision based on culture. Even if you look at different generations, right? As an example, I don't post where I go for dinner every day on Facebook. But if you look at the generation where my daughter belongs to, most of them do, right? Which to me is kind of a violation of your own privacy, but they do it consciously because they find some other benefits. So I think there is another dial to be turned around. It's the value proposition between somebody buying into the concept of products enforcing and helping to preserve security and privacy, and somebody who says, well, I don't really care about privacy, I would like my information to be exposed. So this feature is not important to me.
Okay, and then if other speakers want to respond to that, or people in the room, please by all means do. But I do have a question then for you. We've seen issues on the internet where devices connected to the internet essentially attack the internet itself. And in that sense, yes, privacy or security is an individual choice, but at the same time you put other people at risk. If you, to stick with your analogy, if you drive around with a car without ABS at anti-lock brakes, at some point you're gonna hit that brakes and you might skid out of control and hit somebody else. And so is there a responsibility for users to also protect other users from harm?
I think you're raising a very interesting concept that goes back to your research, what impact technology will have and what responsibilities users will bear. I think we are entering a brand new terrain and frontiers we haven't even encountered right before. What your actions could be considered as an honest mistake or malicious action, right, when you decide to use an unsafe product. But I think we also need to consider the fact that, yes, we do need policies and regulations, and we do need frameworks, and we do need requirements and best practices that talk about if the device is considered to be a host and it's connected to internet, what are the constraints and framework requirements that we can impose to essentially make it connectable device, right? Because also, think about something else. If you would like to connect your device to internet, I think we have to start thinking about, at some point, you need to meet certain requirements. Otherwise, you will not be authenticated. And if you look at the private IoT clouds that are created today, there is a lot of work that actually has been done in that direction. So the devices that are connected to the internet, they are authenticatable devices. They are devices that can actually be proven to be who they claim they are. And by the way, using of SIM cards and trust components and so forth in this area is very important because that creates that ability to create a trust zone. So when you connect something and it doesn't have this trust zone, well, maybe that device should be rejected.
A license to connect. Who wants to take that? Well, Dominic, I see you smile, maybe Corinne. I mean, connection to the internet a human right, but only if you do it safely?
Actually, Marco, well, I was going to say, Andrew had a comment for a while now, which might be relevant to this and give you guys a chance to think about a response.
Hi, my name is Andrew Sullivan. I don't know if this is exactly relevant to that, but I think there are three things that we're circling a little bit here, and I want to try to draw them together in order to see whether it gets us somewhere. And the first of these is whether you like the analogy of seatbelts or airbags or anti-lock brakes or coffee cup holders in your car, The point is that some of these things actually ended up in cars because of social mandates, because the market didn't work, right? That is, the automotive companies refused to implement those things, or when they implemented them, sometimes they only implemented them in very expensive cars, until regulators came along and said, you're going to do this or you're not going to get access to our roads. Now, the difference there is that roads are publicly owned. They have this property that the government actually can say, you're not going to be allowed to go on this road if you don't meet these sort of certifications. The internet isn't like that. It's not like that in two ways. First of all, it's not in a place. Secondly, it's not actually publicly owned, right? The networks are private. So we've got a bunch of incentives that we're going to have to work on, and if we don't figure out how to make the incentives positive ones, that is, we encourage people to build the things in as opposed to trying to make the negative ones, we're not going to be able to do this. Keep in mind also that a regulatory response that says you're going to have to implement all of this stuff is not going to work, for the simple fact that we're talking about the internet of every single thing there is. We cannot possibly certify that many devices. We just don't have that many people in the world to do the auditing of this kind of stuff. So we've got to set it up so that the customers have the incentive to make sure that their stuff is safe. Otherwise, we're just going to connect stuff that's garbage because there's too much incentive to do otherwise. Finally, I want to come back to this other question about a framework for consent in advance. That is, instead of sort of trying to act on this defensively, we try to figure out how to do something so that people can say, hey, wait a minute, I'm willing to permit this stuff to go out, I'm not willing to permit that stuff to go out, and then have an effective way in which the devices respond to that kind of question. Well, it seems to me that that sort of framework and the questions about security, like for instance, should my thermostat be able to talk to random DNS servers on the other side of the planet, are really the same kind of problem. That is, we need to create an internet-like mechanism by which people who are running their network have the ability to do it. And the only problem that we have right now is that an enormous number of these networks are unmanaged. That is, they're networks that nobody, your grandmother isn't going to manage her network. Frankly, I don't manage my home network that well either, and I do this for a living because I'm busy. I have, a job to do, and so I'm not going to spend my entire life checking to make sure that every light switch in my house has had its last flash update. So we have to find another way for me to be able to tell my network, hey, look, this thing's got to be working, and these are the kind of reliability constraints that it's got to be under. I don't want the light going off when I'm calling the ambulance because I want the front porch light to be on, if I'm in trouble. But I also want to make sure that everything's up to date and the thing's got to reboot on regular schedule and so on. All of that stuff has got to be something that we figure out how to build. So there's a really serious challenge to the technical community here that we figure out how to build those kinds of things. And there's a serious challenge to the policy community, that is to state what these policy problems are without reaching for the immediate solution of, oh, I'm going to write the rule that tells you how to do it, rather than to tell you what it is that we need done. Thanks.
Thanks, Andrew. So I think perhaps one thing that jumps out at me a bit is, and we've talked about regulation, you talked about regulation, is whether that's maybe in a dichotomous relationship with standardization, that if you can achieve something through standardization, perhaps including incentivizing people to use those standards, then you avoid the need for regulation down the line. So that's something, I guess, that relates very much to this workshop and to the standards organizations here. I think we had some comments maybe over here. Okay, I'll throw the speakers over here. Did any of you have comments? Okay, sorry.
I hope you can hear me over the noise in the hall. I think, as always, Andrew makes a lot of excellent points. Looking at the seatbelt analogy, though, the fact that because the internet is so different and because it's mostly privately owned, saying that the governments are less effective is, I'm not entirely sure it's true, but I do think what it does point to is to an increased responsibility of companies and of technical actors. And legal options exist there. The UN guiding principles for companies, the Ruggie principles, are one thing that organizations could start looking at. So I think it's really important to do user empowerment. I think it's a great idea. However, the practice of it shows is that people as Andrew just said, even somebody whose job it is to do that does not manage their own network. Now, let alone just regular end users who are just interested in being able to switch on the lights before they come home. I think any kind of solution that leans on that is not going to solve this issue. So I would rather see that companies and corporations really take the responsibility they have towards human rights, towards security, towards privacy seriously, and if it can be done through incentives, then I do think we need to start looking at the Ruggie principles, for instance, as a possibility to lean on to actually make this happen.
Okay, thank you. I've got one more comment here, but I just, very, very last call, if anyone from the floor has any final comment, and then we'll do a quick round with our speakers before we wrap it up here. So, Wout.
Thank you, Chris. My name is Wout Natris. I'm a consultant, but here on behalf of the Dutch IGF. I've got one comment to make, and Andrew said most that I wanted to say, so thank you for that, and much more eloquently. The thing that I would like to say, all the analogies that we make up and that we have, they're just not adequate, because when a car drives into another car, I'm not taking anything away about the pain of losing a family member, but it's individual. And at a certain point, it was not acceptable anymore that there were so many loss of life on the roads. The thing here is, and that's the only sentence I'm going to say, is that whether we can afford to be as less active in this field as we are at this moment. The urgency to do something with the sort of attacks that we've been seeing this year is so huge that I don't think there's another opportunity than to start acting. And you've got a chicken egg here, but who's going to break it? And break the circle and move forward instead of looking at each other. So thank you.
Thank you, Wout. And as Chris said, and we're nearing the end of the session, and probably people already lining up to take over this room. So I want to basically start the wrap up by just making a last round to our speakers, and give them the opportunity for any final comments based on what was said in the room. So don't know where to start. Maybe just start with Paul, and we'll go this way.
Well, I guess it's clear I'm on a sort of a personal campaign to abolish the term IoT. Or maybe to replace it with something like SCIoT, the so-called Internet of Things. But actually, it's quite good to know that it's an English language issue, and there are some alternatives in other languages. So in Chinese, the term that's most often used for the Internet of Things simply translates as connected things, which I think is excellent. In a LACNIC meeting, I heard IoT as expressed in Spanish, translated back into English as Internet of Stuff. And I think that's also a good alternative to leave you with. But I think that's all I've got to say. Thanks.
I think it was a great discussion, and we discussed a lot of stuff following Paul's suggestion. But I really would like to create maybe an actionable point out of this discussion. Collaboration is really important. It's not only collaboration among organizations and people, it's collaboration among organizations of organizations, standard development bodies and such. And I'm very pleased to see that this effort is already underway and people are working together, such as this joint white papers that I just talked about earlier about. I would like to call for participation. We have a tremendous opportunity to come together under the umbrella of Internet Initiative in IEEE. As you can see, it's not IoT or anything, it's just simply Internet Initiative. And what we're trying to do, we're trying to bring policymakers and technology developers together so we can actually create a paradigm shift from consequential development of policies and reaction of technologies to policies to the world where actually we can help to educate each other. Policymakers educating technology developers and technology developers educating policymakers. So we can actually have a synergy in this domain. So welcome to join. If you're interested, find me and I'll be happy to bring you in.
Thank you. Dominic? Or Anja? Any of you? Corrine has to leave, unfortunately, already, so.
Thank you all. This has been an amazing discussion. I think summarizing some of the things that I've emphasized is that the multi-stakeholder model exists, it works, we should build upon it. Secondly, we should look at the responsibility of private actors when it comes to this and make sure that a combination of soft and hard norms exists to make sure that the end users who have or are going to have this in their house have privacy, security, and hopefully one day like human rights too.
Yeah, thanks. I've also learned quite a lot just listening to everybody around the table and in the room. And I think this is the beginning of an ongoing conversation. But one thing that I would say just to close, is that I think we need to be sort of agile and responsive, not just to collaboration and standards making, but to how we think about policy and sort of what the challenges are, and how that's going to change quickly and sort of dramatically over the next, even the next year.
Okay, I'm last. This was a fascinating discussion. I want to also thank Uta for two things that she mentioned, which is really a great way of understanding things, that the state authorities are at the edge of internet governance, and that a new set of actors are emerging which are not plugged into this established technical and standardization space, such as this forum here. Oleg spoke about the current practice of let's wait and see what direction we should follow, what we should implement. This is sometimes a luxury that we don't have a local government. Often we have pressures in terms of today we have the funds to implement this within the next 12 months. It has to go forward. We are very strongly aware of the idea of failure. For a business, failure is a question of writing it off at the end of the year. For us, failure is creating the legacy systems of the next 5, 10, 15 years, which will be there for a very long time, nearly forever. The question of consent is huge in terms of for local government, for our strong democracy-based, one of the closest to the people of local government. The idea of a value proposition for positive economic incentives for privacy and security, yes, especially the number one is the idea of steadiness and stability of the regulatory framework. And finally, we are seeing the beginnings of some sort of trust emerging, and trust in the IoT emerging. As you know, the EU is working on this trusted IoT label. We're seeing this great EU normalization power coming up, and also I think in terms of this actionable point, make it easier for those that are doing ground level implementations to find this. I have to say, I was really surprised that within the HyperCAT specification that was released by the UK Technology Board, if you read through the whole specification, which is about discovery and identification of things within an environment, Annex B, I believe. So we're at the very end of the document, right? Annex B was a skeletal suggestions of security, of policy security framework, which was amazing. It was the first time we actually saw this written down, what they would suggest for security for an IoT system. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Anja. We've got 3 minutes left. I believe Uta is still online and also wants to chime in with a few closing words. So if we can get her back.
Yes, thank you. Am I on again?
Yes, you are.
Yes, I see myself. Great. Yeah, so I just have 2 final remarks, and that is I'd like to pick up on something that Paul has mentioned, that we need to bring together what he called manufacturing ecosystem and the networking world or networking ecosystem. And I fully agree on that. And to make this more, to say this in a more constructive way, I think where we could take off, for instance, would be what I would call obligatory points of passage for manufacturers. So I think those are the places where they can be put in touch with the network and what they're causing to the network, but also how the network can be serving them, maybe also serving them better than they thought. So that is a point of information and a point where capacity building can actually happen. And then the second remark is I'm a little bit more pessimistic about the market, as long as we as users of the Internet of Things or the Internet in general have a lack of insight into cause and effect when something happens in the network with the things. So as long as we do not create that, I think there's little chance that this blame and shame idea is actually going to work. Thank you.
Thank you, Uta. And with that, I would like to thank everybody for coming out here this early and for your lively participation. I think it was a wonderful session, and as speakers mentioned before, this probably is only the start, and no matter what we're going to call it, in the end, we do need to keep this discussion going and then collaborate and hopefully make this a safe option that includes everybody. Thank you all for coming out here, and hope to see you soon.